Iran, it's again, we have this memorandum of understanding. From what I understand, it's been signed already, but we don't know. There's a lot of secrecy around this, and this has many many implications. Will it be upheld by the Americans? To what extent does it shape the region? We see the U.S. Israeli relationship is also impacted by this. Indeed, Netanyahu appears to be in a much weaker position now, but if he's pushed out, are they just rearranging the deck? I mean, most likely his replacement will be much more hawkish. Indeed, from what I understand, Netanyahu, at least he used to have some support by some of the Arab parties. Now, I don't know. It seems like this memorandum of understanding, irrespective of whether or not it will be actually implemented, it will nonetheless have a massive impact on the U.S., Israel, and the wider region. Now, this is a huge, massive question, but again, the issue is huge as well. So I was wondering if you could address this.
Well, it is a huge question you've just asked, but so I'll try two bits of it, perhaps at least. First of all, I call it a framework because it's not really something that has. It's not a treaty. It's not even really a ceasefire. It's a framework for a ceasefire. And as I keep repeating people, I've done 5, I think, ceasefires with the Israelis and Palestinians and others. And the framework is actually often the easiest part. The hardest part is thinking about how to construct a protective zone so that things can move forward, as they will be disrupted for sure. A bomb in a bus was one of the things that disrupted one of them, but equally, someone going out and saying, listen, we don't believe they're serious about this Hudner at all. And as soon as, they do anything, we're going to hit them hard. We already have some of these elements sort of visible approaching in this context of the framework now. But let us look at those 3 headings that you talked about. The first one is about the Iranian one. You underline the controversy of this agreement in the United States, but it's important to understand that it is controversial in Iran. There is a certain tension in Iran, understandably, because they've experienced and lived through the JCPOA experience when things were not upheld, and Iran was, in many ways, ordinary Iranian steel, trapped into a stranglehold, which they are still in. And however, yesterday evening, the Supreme Leader issued a statement in which he said that although he was opposed to the framework agreement himself, he was opposed to it. He was persuaded by Pezeshkian and I presume Kalivat, that he talked about the Honorable President, that there would be no backsliding on the terms of the framework or on Iranian interests. Iranian interests for the Supreme Leader predominantly center, I think, around Hormuz. I mean, he regards this as being the pivot to Iran possibly removing itself from the present situation and entering into a different geopolitical context. It's as wide as that from his point of view, not just, tomorrow, the day after, whatever it is. Hormuz is crucial. We can go into the reasons why it's sort of geopolitical, but he sees that in those terms. What I think he was doing was to sort of put on notice not just if you like, the reformist wing in Iran, but also a skeptical public. That this is not going to go down the path of the JCPOA, that it is going to be that Iran is not simply going to allow, precedents to be sort of established and then duly expanded and expanded and expanded until the whole meaning of the framework is gone. He's basically saying we're not going to allow them to sort of do some sort of precedent which will allow something to happen. The other element, of course, is Lebanon, and Lebanon is crucial. And Iran has substantially changed its position because Iran did not, in the past, in terms of the axis of resistance, intervene directly against Israel until this last period. This was the first time they've gone directly and threatened to bomb heavily northern Israel if Israel went ahead with its threat to flatten Dahir, a suburb of Beirut, and to completely attack. They said, we will go in around the south and attack the northern. That's the part really from the borders right through to the Galilee. And that was, of course, Trump then weighed in and the attack was stopped. So that is the other part. What we're seeing now is the thing being put under test already. And then we go on to America, if you agree, just in a second. But first of all, the Israeli press this morning, the Hebrew press, is again run riot with complaints and anger. And I mean, Israel is in real turmoil, psychological turmoil, emotional turmoil. It's not something small, little hump to get over. It's in deep turmoil. They see this as a huge defeat. They see this that the whole, great victory narrative of the government, to which many Israelis bought into this narrative, that there would be America flying, as they put it in their words, wingtip to wingtip with the Israeli brave airmen to destroy Iran completely, and that they were going to destroy Hezbollah and annex and steal half of Lebanon with the permission of certain proxies in Beirut, and that is still going. And yesterday there was an attack on a ridge, which is near Beaufort Castle, I think. They started to try and take more territory in this region, these hills, Israel, and Hezbollah attacked them with an anti-tank missile. And 4 soldiers died, including a lieutenant colonel who was the commander of the 82nd Brigade. Turmoil, real sort of in Israel. Everyone is saying, this can't be allowed. I mean, 4 dead in one day. I mean, this is outrageous. As Ben-Gvir said, Lebanon must burn with us. And others have been saying similar sort of extravagant things, that we have to, Hezbollah has to suffer, we have to go in and we have to teach them a lesson. Lebanon must burn. I don't know what is going to happen, but the pressure, and as you rightly say, Netanyahu is under huge pressure because the polls were showing, the odds that he was going to win the election in March were, I think, at about 49 or 50%. I can't remember the exact figure. And they're about half of it 34 today. So, I mean, it's hard. If Trump has got problems with his poll standing in America, Netanyahu has got more. And as you know, I mean, that could imply that he ends up going to prison um, if because this election looks as if he is his to lose. But that's on the basis of him doing nothing. Because in fact, I mean, the politics of Israel at the moment is that if Netanyahu does nothing about Lebanon, I doesn't go on to the offensive in Lebanon, his election will be lost and he will lose it. I mean, this is wall-to-wall consensus. This is the situation. So that is what is facing the United States. The Israelis also, because there is a lot of question and turmoil about what this whole thing means, because even if it's not widely understood in the West, the Israelis see this as a huge turning point. A glass ceiling has cracked and broken, that Trump actually took sides on prioritizing an engagement with Iran over supporting Israel's right to take half of Lebanon and occupy it, and to continue with its policies throughout the region. And then Trump then said things that were, had never been heard in Israel before in the press conference after the G7 meeting. I mean, things that he never said before, and said, you're just too heavy-handed in Beirut. I've seen the photographs. You want to kill someone, and so you knock down the whole building with people living in it. This is not acceptable. It's not acceptable. We all thought it was acceptable to Trump, mind you, a month ago, if you'd asked people. But now, apparently, it's not. He said, you're not handling it very well. And then he made the most sort of derogatory sort of statement. He said, maybe we should hand this over to Sharar. He would be more sophisticated in managing Hezbollah and the Lebanon situation. In other words, he was saying, maybe an ex-ISIS leader could do better than you, Netanyahu, and you, Israel, in Lebanon, which was, I mean, an unparalleled sort of slap to the Israelis. So they are shocked by this, but they also say, and this is in the Hebrew press today, it's in Mari, and you can see it on our Substack because it will be out later today, I think. The sort of the comments, but it's also clear that the Israelis understand this is the Middle East has changed. It's a new era. There is no way that they are going to destroy Iran. It's not going to have a regime change. There's no way that they can do it without the United States. The United States provides everything. They cannot attack Iran without U.S. facilitation, refueling, all of these things. Impossible. They understand that. They know that is over. And it is a huge psychological defeat for the whole project. And equally, the sense that this Greater Israel project, by which they are assuming they can bring about Greater Israel by force of arms, irrespective of legal norms, everything, they will just do it. Whether it's legal or not do it, they will do it. This was a huge change that was introduced after the 7th of October, this idea of permanence of security. But what it means is Israelis believe and have come to accept, that what happened on the 7th of October was somehow a Holocaust. It wasn't, but that's what they think now and feel, and that they now live, on the threshold of future Holocaust, and therefore Hezbollah cannot exist. It must be eliminated completely. So so they understand that actually Trump's words mean that the United States may be serious this time in imposing penalties, severe penalties on Israel if they go ahead and respond or retaliate in Lebanon, because this will be seen to be undermining Trump and his great achievement of getting Hormuz opened. That's why I underlined that point about Hormuz and the Supreme Leader in those opening comments when I said, Hormuz was the most important to the Supreme Leader and to the leadership in Iran, and Lebanon was the second. Well, they're both connected, of course, because at the moment we are moving towards Hormuz being open. But if the situation in Lebanon constitutes a breach of the ceasefire, and that's certainly the Iranian perspective, as evidenced by their refusal to go to the talks. On Friday, they're declining to attend the negotiating session on Friday. Then that part of it also comes into question. And how is Trump going to respond? Because he said it out loud. It was quite surprising. Trump said, listen, we had to do this deal because we're running out of the reserves. I saw figures yesterday saying that in Cushing, it is down to 20 million barrels in the Cushing strategic holding. In other words, they're down to the sludge at the bottom, which is, it's got no particular use anyway. It has to be treated and everything before you can use the bottom end of a reserve like that, especially one that's in natural resources. So then it moves on to, that's really, I think, where we are with the framework. The framework, I think, more than many Iranians expected, more than I expected, has triggered this change in the United States. Partly because of Hormuz and partly because, the economic cliff is here. And Trump said it, we have to do this because we were 4 weeks away from running out of oil. So it has produced this change and has produced now a contentious battle in the United States, a huge battle between the pro-Israel Zionist groups and the Trump supporters, and who are insistent on what they describe as America first and not Israel first. How do they get to that point? And the midterms are coming up. Now, the question is, the general consensus, the normalist consensus is, this is going to be so damaging for Trump. He's going to lose, and the Republicans are going to lose. I must say, I had thought that, but now I'm not so sure. Firstly, because I think, that the election process for the Senate is a rotational. It's not all at once. It's one part and then another part goes up for election, like that. So actually, the figures may be not exactly right, but there are about 20 Republican seats that are in contention at the moment, the Republican seats. That is, in the House. This is, this could swing the midterms for sure, but also it's not irretrievable, at least in the view, I think, of Trump and his team. 20 seats, not all of them will swish. And also, it's not clear there does seem to be a sense in which the the sort of the solid base of MAGA hasn't defected from Trump because of the personal loyalty more than anything else. Not because they like the war in Iran or anything else, but as a personal sense of loyalty to him, which has these emotional overtones that is very hard to define exactly, but he does have a considerable hold over people. And in many respects, because of this debate, which, prominent people are pointing out that, is America in control of its own foreign policy? Or have we, if you like, delegated our foreign policy to a foreign power? Is gripping the MAGA base in the aftermath of what happened, the assassination earlier of the Christian spokesman in MAGA, and Joe Kent also, and others are raising this issue. So I think there's a feeling that it may not be as catastrophic. In fact, there will be some in the Republican component that actually may think that, this is no bad thing, and therefore be more supportive of Trump than we thought. But it was, I hadn't realized that, the number of seats is actually not huge that will be allowed. But I mean, it may be exaggerated or not enough or whatever. Of course, it'll be contentious. But now, if Netanyahu goes in and attacks Lebanon, I think it will now shift to being seen to not just, slapping Trump in the face, but slapping America in the face. That it will be seen by MAGA. Maybe not by, obviously not by the neocons and the ardent Zionist element, but by many Americans, who don't understand all the nuances of it, but see that, there was a framework that was signed by Trump visibly at Versailles, and Netanyahu and Israel are blowing it up. I mean, if you see it in those simple terms, it wouldn't be surprising if actually, this rebounds to Trump's advantage politically. May not, too early to say. And, there's undoubtedly going to be major effort to overturn this by those that are committed to Israel's supremacy in the region and regional domination. And that, we don't know how that's going to turn out. Will they succeed? It'll be the first time that, a president has gone up. But Netanyahu essentially, not Netanyahu personally, because this is coming from all of Israel, all of the leaders, whether it is the opposition leaders across the board, all are saying, it's not just Ben-Gvir, they're saying, they must pay, they've got to suffer, they've got to be for these poor people that were killed yesterday. So if that happens, it is going to further, I think, increase the distance between the United States and Israel. It's going to push it further away and could push it towards taking some sort of measures. Perhaps they'd be tentative to begin with, but some sort of measures imposed on Israel for having for attempting to blow up, particularly if the Iranians respond to this by, if you like, restricting not completely, but restricting to a certain extent the Hormuz passageway. Who knows what they will do? But this would be one. I mean, very clearly they understand this is the thing that brought events to a head and brought about the framework, and that's where they might well move.
Well, my first thought when I saw they had this remarkable statements by Trump was that they fell short of action. That is just in the language. But on the other hand, this language matters. This, as you said, this is ringing through the media in Israel. This is putting shockwaves, but also in the United States. All the America firsters, the people who thinks like Tucker Carlson that they shouldn't put Israel first, but America first. They must surely feel vindicated. They have wind in their sails at the moment. So it does change. Yeah,
It changes so much in that way. I mean, it has, something has broken. If you like, a paradigm has been blown up. And it was just in this piece of paper, which, as you say, is not a commitment to anything particularly. It's just a framework for starting, a different process. But that paradigm has been blown up because Trump visibly cited and said, and because of language, it talks about the sovereignty and the rights of sovereignty of Iran and of, by implication, of Lebanon too. I mean, it says respect for the sovereignty of state, But I mean, Iran is being treated as a sovereign state and being engaged with as a sovereign state and not as a recalcitrant terrorist state. And that is a change. Yes, the language, I'm sure Trump will say, and you'll have Ted Cruz coming out and saying, they're all terrorists, they're all horrible people. We have to do everything against them. But the fact that, this language was incorporated in it, and then Trump at the G7 spoke in a very different way about Israel and said, you don't know what you're doing in Lebanon anyway, so it's best if you get out of it. Is a shock, a psychological shock. The whole paradigm is broken, and Israelis don't know what to do about it. I mean, really, they don't know what to do about it. And people are saying, and serious Israelis are saying, as Chikrinowitz is there, we will have to think about this in the aftermath because the original strategy of Israel is broken. And we have to think and understand that Trump is maneuvering towards a new sort of understanding between America and Iran. I don't know that it'll end up in an agreement or all of the elements of it, but there is a new, if you like, atmosphere. Let's just call it an atmosphere. There is a new atmosphere that is coming, and that he's serious about it. And he says, I don't think that this is damaging to Israeli